I need someone to bring order to my home, and you need a roof that won't collapse under the ice." The night Kegra lost her workshop, the wind cut through Tescan Vale like a blade. The council had withdrawn their support. She packed her tools with numb fingers, watching her last hope sink into frozen ground. The Northmarks did not forgive weakness. Every creature that lived there knew it. The elk that wandered too far from the herd, the river that froze too shallow, the fire that burned too low. Winter was not a season. It was a judge, and it handed down its verdicts without mercy. Kegra knew this better than most. She stood inside her small carpentry shop at the edge of Millbrook, watching the last ember in the forge die. Outside, the wind hurled itself against the wooden walls like something alive and furious, searching for a crack, a gap, any weakness it could use to get inside. The structure groaned under the pressure of the snow piling on the roof. She pressed her green fingers against the workbench and breathed slowly. The council's decision had come that morning, delivered by a pale man in a heavy coat who could not look her in the eye. No more copper, no more protection. The village had decided that paying for orc craftsmanship was no longer worth the social cost. Too many complaints from traders who did not want to do business near a greenskin shop. Too many whispers about her tools, her rituals, her bone ornaments hanging from the doorframe. They called it a budget decision. Kegra called it what it was. She had built things in this town. Good things. A bridge brace that held through 2 floods. Furniture that outlasted the men who ordered it. She had done this with her hands, with wood, with patience. And none of it mattered now. The snow outside was falling thicker. She began packing her tools one by one, wrapping each in cured leather with practiced care. The bone-handled chisels, the copper-tipped awls, the carving knives her mother had given her before the clans scattered across the mountains. Each piece felt heavier than it should. She did not cry. Orcs from the mountain lines did not cry over spilled copper. But there was something in her chest, a stone she could not lift, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. When she tied the last bundle, she sat on the workbench and listened to the storm. The shop creaked. A chunk of ice slid off the roof and hit the ground outside like a hammer strike. Somewhere deep in the timber walls, something cracked. This building would not survive the winter. She had known it for weeks. The frame was too old, the wood too dry, too brittle. She had patched what she could, but patching only delays the inevitable. The council's protection had included a maintenance fund she had never thought to value until it was gone. Now, the walls were hers alone. She stood and moved to the small window, brushing frost from the inside of the glass with her thumb. Beyond it, Millbrook's lanterns flickered in the storm, people in warm homes. People with guilds and families and walls that held. Kegra had none of those things now. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. Something passed through her then. Not wind, not cold, but a presence. The bone ornaments above the doorframe clicked together without being touched. Her mother's clan shamans had a word for that sound, a spirit testing a threshold, searching for the one it was sent to find. Kegra opened her eyes. The ornaments were still. The wind changed direction. 3 seconds later, 3 heavy knocks landed on her door. The knock did not sound like a request. It landed on the old, warped door with the weight of someone who had never in their life needed to ask permission. Kegra had heard knocks like that before, from clan elders, from mountain warlords, from men who owned things and knew it. She crossed the shop floor and opened the door. Cold air poured in like a wave. Behind it stood a man. He was broad, not tall in the way that made people look up, but wide in the way that made doorways feel smaller. His coat was wolf fur, dark and heavy, dusted white at the shoulders from the falling snow. His jaw was set hard beneath a short beard threaded with grey. His eyes were pale, the colour of iron left out in the frost. She recognized him. Everyone in the Northmarks recognized Benedict Ashford. He owned the copper mines in the ridge above Tescan Vale. He owned 3 river barges that moved ore down to the southern towns. He had built Bloodstone Fortress with his own hands and the hands of 100 workers over a decade. He was not a lord by title, but the land listened to him the same way. He looked at her without softening his expression. "I know what the council did this morning," he said. His voice was low and roughened by cold air and years of shouting over furnace noise. Kagra kept her hand on the doorframe. "Then you know it is not your concern." "I didn't say it was." He glanced past her into the shop. His eyes moved quickly, the way a man's eyes move when he is calculating. He looked at the empty forge, the packed tools, the cracked ceiling beam she had braced with a metal strap 2 months ago. He looked at the window she had patched with oiled cloth where the glass had broken. He looked at all of it in 3 seconds. "May I come in?" he said. It was not quite a question. Kagra stepped aside. He entered and stopped in the center of the room, not removing his coat, not sitting. He stood the way a man stands when he does not plan to stay long, but has something important to say before he leaves. "I have a problem," he said. "Most people who knock on my door do. My problem is not a broken chair." He turned to face her fully. "My wife died 3 winters ago. I have 2 boys. Rowan is 8, Miles is 6. Since she passed, the house has become—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. He seemed to be choosing a word carefully. "Unmanageable." Kagra said nothing. "I have workers to run the mines and men to run the barges," he continued. "I do not have anyone to run the house. The boys are wild. Not bad, wild. There is a difference. They need structure. They need someone who will not flinch when Rowan tests them, and he will test them. He tests everyone." The fire was completely dead now. The shop was cold. "You are telling me this because?" Kagra asked. Benedict reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He set it on the workbench without unfolding it. "Because I am proposing an arrangement," he said. "You need a roof that will not fall on you before spring. I need order in my house. I am not talking about charity. I am talking about a contract." Kagra looked at the paper. She did not touch it. The wind outside drove a sheet of snow against the window. The oilcloth patch fluttered, and from somewhere beneath the floorboards, deep where the frozen earth began, she heard a low sound. Not wind, not wood settling, something older. She had heard that sound once before, the night her mother died, and the clan shaman had said, "The earth remembers what we are about to decide." She picked up the contract. "Tell me what you are proposing," she said. Benedict did not dress it up. He stood in her dying shop, with the cold still coming off his coat, and laid the offer out like a man laying stone. 1 piece at a time, flat and level, with no decoration. "You move into Bloodstone Fortress. You have your own room, your own space, your own authority over the household. You manage the boys, manage the staff, and keep the house from falling apart from the inside." He paused. "In exchange, you get a roof that will last the next 50 winters, meals, materials for your craft, and protection. No patrol in the North Marks touches anyone living under my name." Kagra listened without moving. "I am not asking you to be a servant," he added, and something in his tone made it clear he had thought carefully about how to say that part. "I am asking you to be the authority in that house. The difference matters." She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away. Orcs understood arrangements. Her people had run on them for generations. Alliances between clans, agreements between hunters and shamans, trades that were sealed not with written contracts, but with witnessed words and the pressure of bone ring handshakes. The Northmark's humans used paper. The principle was the same. "Your boys," she said, "they know you are here?" "No. They will not welcome this." "No," he said again, with no attempt to soften it. "Rowan especially. He is angry at everything right now. He was close to his mother." And you are offering me as a replacement. I am offering you as a structure, not a replacement. He held her gaze. I am not a sentimental man, Kagra. I am a practical one. I need my house to function. I need my sons to become men who can carry something heavier than their own grief. And I need someone who can look at Rowan when he raises his voice and not step back. She almost smiled at that. What made you think of me? She asked. I watched you work, he said simply. 2 years ago, the bridge at Redstone Creek, the foreman wanted to tear out the whole eastern support. You said no. You looked at the wood for an hour, made 3 cuts, and saved the whole structure. He folded his arms. You see what is underneath before you touch it. I need that in my house. The compliment landed strangely. She was not used to being seen by humans. Usually she was tolerated, employed, or dismissed, not studied. She looked down at the folded paper on the workbench. And the law? She said. What does the arrangement look like on paper? Guardian contract. You are registered as the boy's acting guardian and household director. It gives you legal standing in the Vale courts. If anyone disputes your authority in that house, the paper backs you. She picked up the contract and read it slowly, line by line. He waited without rushing her. It was clear, it was fair. No hidden language, no clause that twisted the terms. Outside, the wind picked up again. The cracked ceiling beam shifted. A thin dusting of snow sifted through a gap near the roof and settled on the cold forge. In the grey ash of the dead fire, Kagra noticed a shape, a mark the cooling had drawn without intention. Her clan called such things ghostwriting. The dead leaving impressions in what remains. The shape looked like an open hand. She pulled her carving knife from her belt, pressed her thumb to the blade until blood appeared, and pressed it to the bottom of the page. When do we leave? She asked. The barge moved slowly against the current. Benedict's river barge was built for cargo, not comfort, flat-decked, low-sided, smelling of copper ore and pine tar. Kagra sat at the front with her pack between her boots, watching the frozen banks of the Tescan River slide past in the grey morning light. Benedict stood at the rear, directing the 2 bargemen with short gestures. He did not talk much during the journey. She appreciated that. She thought about the boys, 8 and 6. Both had lost their mother 3 winters ago. That meant the younger one, Miles, had been 3 years old when it happened. He might not remember her face clearly by now. He would remember feelings, warmth, a voice, a smell, the absence of those things. Rowan was different. 8 years old when a mother dies is old enough to understand what you have lost, old enough to build something hard around the wound. She had seen it before, in the clans. Children who lost their mothers too early either became very quiet or very loud. The quiet ones were easy to miss. The loud ones broke things. Kagra stared at the ice along the bank. She was not a mother. She had no children of her own. Her life had been her craft. Wood, stone, joints and angles, the satisfaction of something built that would outlast the builder. She had never thought much about teaching children. She had never needed to. But she understood broken things. She understood looking at damage and finding the place where it had started. She understood that you did not fix a cracked beam by painting over it. She would need to find the crack. By midday, the river curved south and the land opened up. The snow-covered plains stretched wide and flat under a pale sky, broken only by the dark line of the Iron Ridge Mountains to the west. And then, rising above the plain, like something grown rather than built, Bloodstone Fortress came into view. It was not beautiful in the way of carved things. It was beautiful in the way of old things. Massive and permanent. Dark stone walls the color of dried blood. Narrow windows like watching eyes. Smoke rising from 3 chimneys in slow grey columns. It was the most solid structure she had ever seen. Something in her chest settled slightly. The barge docked at the private landing below the fortress. A path of fitted stone led up the hill to the main gate. Benedict walked ahead and Kagra followed, her pack on her back, her tools wrapped in leather at her hip. Halfway up the path, she stopped. There was a woman standing at the edge of the tree line, to the left of the path, still, watching. She wore no coat despite the cold, and her outline was wrong. Too thin at the edges, the way frost looks when morning light hits it from behind. Kagra blinked. The tree line was empty, just pines and shadow. She kept walking. The gate opened before they reached it. A woman in a grey dress stood back to let them pass, looking at Kagra with careful blankness. Inside, iron lanterns lined the walls, the floor was dark slate, and a staircase of heavy timber rose to the upper level. At the top stood a boy. Dark eyes, jaw set, shoulders tight with a decision already made. Behind a stone pillar below, a smaller shape hid, wide eyes, pale face. Benedict removed his coat. "Rowan, this is Kagra. She will be living with us." The boy said nothing for a long moment. "She is not ours," he said. "The first week was a war with no declared sides." Rowan did not yell. He was smarter than that. He broke things in ways that could almost be explained as accidents. A jar of lamp oil knocked from a shelf. A set of ledgers shoved behind a cabinet where they could not be found. The door to the kitchen bolted shut from the inside so that breakfast was delayed for the entire household. He watched Kagra the whole time to see what she would do. She did not yell either. She cleaned the oil. She found the ledgers. She borrowed a piece of bent iron from the tool room and unbolted the kitchen door in 4 minutes while Rowan watched from the hallway, with his weight on one leg and his jaw set, eyes measuring. Miles was a different problem. He did not fight. He disappeared. He had an ability to fold himself into corners and under furniture and behind curtains that would have been impressive in any other circumstance. He ate almost nothing. When Kagra entered a room, he would leave it quietly, without running, as though he simply needed to be somewhere else. She let him go. On the third day, she found him in the stable, sitting in the hay beside the smallest of Benedict's horses, a brown mare named after a river. Miles was not doing anything, just sitting with his knees pulled up, leaning against the horse's flank. The horse did not seem to mind. Kagra sat down in the hay a few feet away. She did not speak. She just sat. Miles watched her from the corner of his eye. After a long silence, he said very quietly, "Horses don't lie." "No," she agreed. "They don't." "Papa said you build things," he said. "I do." Can you build something that keeps bad dreams away?" Kagra looked at the boy. His face was serious. He meant the question. "I can show you how to carve a protection symbol into wood," she said carefully. "My people believe it helps. I do not make promises about dreams, but it is something to do with your hands when you feel afraid." Miles looked at her for the first time directly. "Okay," he said. It was the edge of trust. Kagra did not push further. That evening she went looking for Rowan. She found him in the far corner of the second floor, in a small room once used for storage. He had dragged a blanket in there. He looked up at her with the face of someone who expected to be told to leave. She sat down across from him. "I am not here to take anything from you," she said. He said nothing. "I am going to stay anyway, because that is what the contract says, and I honor contracts, but I am not trying to replace something. I am just here." Rowan looked at the floor. "She used to sing," he said. The words came rougher than he intended. Kagra felt the weight of it settle in the small room like smoke. "Teach me one," she said quietly. He looked up, surprised, guarded. "Not tonight," he said finally. Kagra nodded and stood. "Good night, Rowan." She walked back down the hallway. The fortress was quiet. Then, from the far end of the corridor, the direction of the room where Benedict's wife had once slept, sealed now and untouched, came a sound, 3 soft knocks. From inside. Kagra stopped. She listened. Silence followed, deep and complete. She walked on. Some thresholds were not hers to open. The following evening, Kagra sat in the hallway outside the storage room with her back against the wall and a piece of scrap wood in her hands, carving by lantern light. She was not working on anything important, just keeping her hands busy the way her mother had taught her. Movement calms the mind. The previous night's conversation with Rowan sat quietly in her chest, unresolved but not heavy. She had offered. He had said not tonight. That was already more than nothing. She heard him before she saw him. He came and sat beside her in the hallway without saying anything. He watched her hands work the wood for several minutes. She could feel him thinking, the way you can feel a fire thinking before it catches. "The first line goes like this," he said, and he sang it. His voice was small and a little cracked at the edges in the way of boys who are growing too fast, but the melody was clear and simple, a valley song, one of the old tunes from the lower settlements, the kind sung to children by firelight. She listened without moving her hands. He sang the first 2 lines. Then he stopped. "Go on," she said, without looking up from the wood. He sang the rest. 7 lines total, ending on a note that fell instead of rising. A sad melody, but the kind of sad that was soft rather than sharp. When he finished, the hallway was quiet. "Again," she said, slowly. He sang it again, watching her mouth. She shaped the sounds silently, learning the syllables. "Once more," she said. He sang it a 3rd time and she hummed along, off-pitch but close enough that he did not stop. When it ended, he looked at the piece of wood in her hands. She had carved the ward mark her mother had pressed above every door of their clan's winter shelter, the sign meaning. "What is inside here is protected." "What is that?" he asked. "A ward," she said, "for staying safe through the cold months." She held it out to him. He took it carefully, turned it over, examined the cuts. "Miles is scared of the dark," he said quietly. "I know. He won't say so. He does not need to say so." Rowan closed his fingers around the carving. He looked at her with something still guarded, but with possibility moving underneath it, not warmth yet, but the beginning of warmth. "I will teach you the 2nd verse tomorrow," he said. Then he got up and went to his room. Kagra sat alone in the hallway for a while, listening to the fortress settle. The stone walls held the cold at a distance. Somewhere deep in the structure she could hear the low pulse of heat from the main fireplace. The lantern beside her flickered once, though there was no draught. She looked at it. The flame steadied, then bent, slowly, deliberately, toward the sealed door at the end of the hall. It held that angle for 3 full seconds before returning to center. Kagra watched it without moving. She did not know if it was a warning or a welcome. Spirits rarely made that distinction clear. She only knew that whatever remained in that sealed room had chosen to stay quiet tonight, and she would honor that. She picked up her tools and went to bed. Spring did not come gently to the North Marks. It arrived in argument. Warm days that gave way to sudden freezes, mud that appeared and then hardened overnight into something that tripped horses and broke wagon wheels. The ice on the Tescan broke apart in loud cracks that echoed across the plain like distant cannon fire. It was a season of transition, and transition was always uncomfortable. Inside Bloodstone Fortress, a similar thaw was happening. Kagra had established what she called the Law of the Threshold, a term she did not explain to Benedict, but simply put into practice. Everyone in the house worked before they rested. Rowan and Miles had tasks appropriate to their age. The staff had clear responsibilities. Meals happened at fixed times. Fires were maintained on a schedule. It was not military, it was structural, like load-bearing walls. Rowan still tested her, but the tests had changed. They were less about destruction now, and more about negotiation. He pushed to see where she would hold and where she would bend. She made sure he could see both clearly. When he demanded to skip the afternoon study hour to go to the river, she said no. When he asked to spend Sunday mornings at the stables instead of at study, she said yes and arranged it. He was learning her map. She was learning his. Miles had changed the most quietly. He had started coming to her workshop, a stone room on the ground floor she had converted into a working space, and watching her carve without asking permission. Eventually, she started leaving a small piece of scrap wood and a blunt tool near the door for him. He began carving rough shapes, working with focus, trying again when the shape came out wrong. She said nothing about this. She just made sure the scrap wood was always there. Benedict noticed. He appeared at the edges of things, at dinner, watching his sons talk without shouting. At the doorway of the workshop, watching Miles work in silence. One morning he came before the boys were awake, carrying 2 cups of black coffee from the southern trade routes. He held one out. She took it. They stood in the doorway together and drank, looking out at the grey-green plain where the last snow retreated into the shadows of the ridge. "You have a method," he said. "I have habits," she corrected. "Same thing for someone who knows what they are doing." "They are good boys," she said. "I know," he said, and something in his voice was different, something older and quieter. "I have not always been able to reach them." "Grief changes distance," she said. "It moved them away from you too, not just from her." He was quiet. "Yes," he said finally. That night, alone in her room, Kagra woke before dawn, without knowing why. She sat up in the dark and listened. The fortress was silent. But on the wall beside her bed, the ward mark she had carved into the stone frame on her first night cast a shadow that did not match the angle of the moonlight. It stretched toward the window, pointing outward, toward the ridge. She went to the window and looked out. The plain was empty, white and still under the moon. She stood there for a long time, watching. Then she went back to bed. By morning, the shadow was gone. Summer came fully, and the fortress opened up. Doors that had been shut through the cold months were left open. Light moved through the halls in long yellow bars in the morning, and the smell of grass and river water replaced the constant smell of smoke and iron. The boys were outside more, louder and wilder, but in the way that was healthy rather than desperate. Rowan had started working in the workshop with Kagra on afternoons when the heat was too heavy for outdoor work. He had not announced this. He had simply appeared one day, asked what needed doing, and begun. She gave him a task, fitting joints on a set of cabinet panels for one of the valley settlements. Detail work. It required patience. He was clumsy at first. She corrected him without making it significant, showed him the angle, redirected his hand once, let him continue. By the 3rd session, the joints were clean. He did not say anything about it. He did not need to. She could see it in the way he held the work to the light, rotating it, checking the fit, looking for what was wrong before anyone else could point to it. That was a craftsman's habit. It had to grow on its own. Miles had taken to following Benedict on his rounds of the lower mining operations, a compromise Kagra had suggested when it became clear the younger boy needed more of his father. That had required a conversation. She had knocked on Benedict's study door one evening in late spring, entered when he called, and told him plainly, "Miles needs you to show him the mines, not because he wants to work in them, but because he wants to know what his father does when he is not home." "He told you this?" Benedict asked. "No. He never tells me anything directly, but I watch him." A long pause. "I assumed he needed to be left alone," Benedict said. "He is so quiet. I thought he needed space." "He needs presence," she said. "Space and absence feel the same to a child who has already lost someone." Benedict nodded once, stood, and went to find his son. Now, on a warm summer evening, Kagra sat on the bench outside the workshop and watched Benedict and Miles walk back up from the lower grounds together. Miles was talking with gestures about something at the mine mouth. Benedict was listening with his full attention. Rowan came and sat beside her. "He seems different," Rowan said. "Your father or your brother?" Rowan considered. "Both." She nodded. "You seem different too," he said. He was looking at his hands, marked with nicks and calluses from the workshop, the hands of someone learning a trade. "Good different or bad different?" she asked. "Just different, like when a room gets cleaned out. Still the same room, just clearer." Kagra was quiet for a moment. "I will take that," she said. That evening she found a feather on her workshop threshold, black, too large for any bird she knew from the valley. She picked it up and turned it in the light. Her mother's shaman would have called it a marker, a spirit acknowledging a boundary it had agreed not to cross. She set it on the sill and left it there. Some agreements do not need words. The autumn market in Millbrook was the largest gathering of the year. Every settlement within 2 days' ride sent representatives, traders, farmers, miners, hunters. The village square filled with stalls and noise and the smell of roasting meat and sawdust. It was loud and crowded and deeply human in the way of frontier towns, which meant it was full of stares when Benedict's party arrived, and one of the figures beside him had green skin and bone ornaments threaded into her belt. Kagra had been to markets before. She knew how to hold herself in them. She kept her chin level. She moved with purpose. She did not look at the people who stared, but she was aware of all of them. Exits, tensions, who held themselves with intention, and who was simply curious. Rowan walked on her left. Miles was on her right, holding his father's hand. At one of the stalls, a trader from the southern settlements made a comment, something low and ugly about greenskins and northern men who could not manage their own households. He said it to the man beside him, not directly, but loud enough. Kagra felt Rowan go still beside her. She put her hand briefly on his shoulder, not holding him back. Just a signal. Wait. Benedict turned slowly and looked at the trader with the stillness that belongs to men who own things and have never needed to shout to make a point. He said nothing. He just looked. The trader found something else to focus on very quickly. Benedict turned back. They kept walking. Later, at the edge of the square, Rowan said, "How did you know not to say anything?" "Because your father handled it," she said. "But you wanted to." "Yes," she said honestly. "But wanting to do something and doing it are two different decisions. You choose based on what the situation needs, not on what you feel. Is that an orc thing or a you thing?" "Both," she said. He nodded. "I was wrong," he said quietly without looking at her. "When you first came, I was wrong about you." She did not make it bigger than it was. "Thank you for saying so." He nodded once and went to find his brother. That evening, back at Bloodstone Fortress, Kagra and Benedict sat beside the fireplace in the main hall after the boys were asleep. She had a piece of wood in her hands. He had a ledger he was not reading. "The trader, today," he said. "I know. It will happen again. I know that too. Does it tire you?" "Yes, but most things worth doing are tiring." He set down the ledger. "What we have built here, it is not what I expected when I knocked on your door." "What did you expect?" she asked. "Order, function, a good arrangement." "What is it now?" she asked. He held her gaze, and behind the careful flatness he kept in his expression was something solid and earned. "It is home," he said. Outside, the autumn wind moved through Tescan Vale with less fury than the winter winds. Cold, but the kind of cold that reminded you the fire inside was worth keeping. Kagra looked at the ward mark above the fireplace, the one Rowan still carried a copy of in his coat pocket, touching it the way people touch things they do not want to admit matter to them. She looked back at the fire. The bone ornaments above the front door clicked once in the still air. She heard it from where she sat. No wind, no draught. She did not look up. She already knew what it meant. The threshold had been accepted. Whatever had been watching since the night she packed her tools in the coal shop at Millbrook had seen enough, and it was satisfied. She let the fire burn. It would stay lit.